Welcome back to Deep Dive with Dan Jones and part 3 of our 4-part interview with retired Command Master Chief Justin Gray.
How do you supervise something? How do you review something that you don't even speak the language? Right? How do you review a technical procedure when you don't even know the components?
Right.
So, because they have to sign them,
Right.
right? Approving them.
Right. How do they approve something if they don't know whether or not it passed or failed? Or
And it's really easy for them to go, well, Chief, is this good? Well, yes, sir. Sign away.
Right.
Right. Well, but you didn't teach them anything.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if it goes wrong.
Right, because it's going to be they're going to be the one that's in trouble.
And what did they learn? Not to trust the chief.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you have to make sure that you spend the time to invest the time in them to learn.
Do you think that there's any similarity to that type of relationship in the civilian world where, you as the head of, a group of people is teaching your boss and being responsible to make them a better leader and more technically informed?
So no. It's certainly, missing in like 99% of government civilian. They have nothing like that.
Right.
Right. They don't, and I don't know why. It's like that, but no, for the most part, I think it comes down to in a business, right? Everybody you hired, you want them to add value right now.
Right.
Because every dollar that you spend on them in overhead,
Right.
which leadership training is definitely overhead.
Yep.
Right? But it's not, but it is on a spreadsheet.
Well, right. I mean, it's an expense. It's it's money out of your pocket while you're doing it. It's
right.
A long-term investment, but
right. But are they going to be there long term? Is kind of the question you learn in the Navy. Like, I got that guy for years.
Well, you hope, right?
Yeah. Unless he does something really bad,
right?
Yeah. They're with me.
Right.
Like, I'm investing in them.
Right.
And if I'm staying in the Navy, I'm probably gonna run into them again.
Right. And you and I have talked about that, where officers that you've served with have been in other commands or ancillary that you deal with them. So
yeah. So I think on the business side, it's harder to see that long-term investment come to fruition.
Right.
Because
unless it's the boss's son, right?
Maybe.
You invest in the boss's son because you hope he's as good as
if it's a family-owned business,
right,
hopefully that guy is going to be
as good as dad was or mom.
But I think it's harder to make the case, the business case, if you will, to put that kind of energy and time into somebody. Because when they're doing that, they're not necessarily producing whatever you hired them to produce.
Right. Yeah.
Do I think it's valuable? Absolutely. Right. Did every employee knowing more about the product or the service that you provide and every facet of it helps. Even if it's just to understand where their end product goes. Like, if you're in a big engineering firm, like for example, I talked to an engineer one time in my last job, and he's like, Master Chief, I don't understand why I can't put this access door on the back of this panel. It'd be a whole lot more convenient. Just go right there, and then I could stop all this other engineering nonsense that I'm having to do to make it open in the front. I was like, do you know where that gets installed? No. I'm like, when it's installed, it's up against the bulkhead.
Oh.
So if you put the access panel on the front, we can't open it.
Right. Yeah.
And so then he's like, oh,
right.
okay.
Yeah.
back to putting it on the front, right? So that just little bit of knowledge, right, of the end use of his product,
Right,
like completely changes his perspective on what he's doing.
right. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so it is valuable, but I don't think that uh the amount of time that you invest in making somebody a better leader, it's not like a one-time conversation, right? It's like
Right.
repetition and
Yeah.
discussion and scenario based, like, okay, hey, if this happened, what would you do? How would you see it? What documents govern, this scenario?
right,
That's labor intensive. And most times for me, it happens like after the day,
right.
like the time between like 4 and 6 o'clock.
Right, yeah, so I know, for the viewers, I've told you, you and I have talked about this story I'm gonna tell. And I'd certainly never, in my 10 years in the Army, risen to the rank that you did. So I certainly wasn't what the Army would call a platoon sergeant. But I interacted quite frequently with a number of the platoon leaders. And there was this one platoon leader that he was a great guy. His guys loved him. He was technically and tactically proficient for a second lieutenant. And he was learning, but he had a terrible temper. And I don't mean a temper where he'd take out on the guys, but in the Army, and I think it's the same thing in the Navy, you've got your primary job as an officer, and then you've got all these other secondary jobs, right? You're the VD officer for the unit or morale or whatever. And this lieutenant was frustrated because they just gave him like his fourth or fifth assignment of some other secondary duty that he had to do. And I was coming down the hall for the orderly room, and I heard screaming and I heard trash cans flying, and I'm like, what in the hell's going on? And I can see a couple of the guys from this officer's platoon out in the hallway. And I just kind of peek in the door, and I see the platoon sergeant there and a lieutenant. And I come in and I close the door behind me. And I knew the platoon sergeant because I'd worked for him when he and I had been up at headquarters. And I kind of closed the door and I'm like, sir, what's going on? He's like, oh, it's all these secondary duties. Like, I joined the Army to be a warrior, not to be put in charge of pizza night, for the unit. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sir. I said, guess what? I get you're frustrated. I really do, I said, but this is the way that the Army is. I said, but the thing is, you cannot afford to let your men ever see you lose your temper. You cannot ever afford to let your men see you not in control, because these men, you're going to lead them into combat. And the last thing you want them thinking is, oh, I flipped out over, being put in charge of a pizza party. What's it going to be like when the bullets start flying?
Right?
And the platoon sergeant was just standing there and he's shaking his head and he goes, Jonesy, he said, I've been trying to tell him. And I'm like, well, sir, you need to listen, to Sergeant so-and-so. I said, he knows and he's got your best interests at heart, and then the lieutenant just kind of looked at me. And I think at that point, he looked at me, he looked at the sergeant, he looked back at me, and I think it just started to dawn on him that, uh, the people underneath him were giving him those lessons that he needed so that, we weren't so worried about this lieutenant. We were worried about this lieutenant when he became a major or a colonel, or maybe even a general. And that lesson wasn't for today. It was for, being the leader of tomorrow.
And that's the hard part about training junior officers, is you don't know how good a job you did until 10 years later.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yep. So all the NCO officers you trained, they're the ones that keep crashing into ships over in Japan?
No, none of those guys. All my guys are doing very well, thank you. So yeah, it's the training piece. I would say that every single time I responded to a situation in an emotional manner
Right.
has failed to achieve the outcome that I desired.
Right. But let me ask you, how about controlled emotion?
Yes, absolutely.
Or fake outrage or,
Yes.
anger. Right.
as long as
Yeah.
you have your faculties about you,
Yes,
right? As
exactly.
long as it is not the rage speaking.
Yep.
Right? It can be a tool
Yep.
but the other thing for your audience, right? Leadership in the military isn't just about screaming at people.
No, I know.
Right,
Yeah,
like,
everybody thinks that we're all Army, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when I left my tour on the Ike,
Mm.
my sailors that work for me all told me, like, I never heard you raise your voice in this entire tour. And every bit as effective as anybody who had preceded me,
Right.
right? You can't, like, it has never been my experience that responding on that initial thought, right? All the best emails I've written, I've deleted and not sent. Right? That initial response is often will make you feel better
Right.
in the moment and make you feel way worse in the long term.
It doesn't serve the purpose, doesn't get the point across or the situation resolved. No, you're right.
Yeah, and so leadership in the military isn't just screaming at people.
No,
100%. Like,
no,
not.
it's not.
So, and you see that I find that my wife experiences more verbal abuse and yelling in her various civilian jobs that she's held
Right.
over the years than I have ever experienced in the military.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely a mindset amongst people in the civilian world that screaming is, leading. I've seen people actually think that, motivating people by talking down to them or yelling at them is actually or chiding them in such a way as to embarrass them, is oh yeah, but I'm communicating, I'm leading. No, you're not.
No, leading is setting a standard,
Right.
communicating a standard, and then holding people to the standard.
Right.
Right. And if this is the standard and you choose to not operate at the standard, right, maybe down here
Hmm.
most days, but this is where you have to get.
Right.
The slope of the line between here and here is measured in pain.
Yeah.
Right. Pain in just hours and resources and whatever it takes to get to here. Where is it now? Is it achievable to operate at this standard all the time? Maybe not, right? Because of wear and tear on equipment or people or whatever. So maybe you choose like maybe right here, but
Right.
always pulling back up to the standard, right? Always pull back up to the standard. That way, when the time comes for audit, inspection, combat,
Right.
whatever it is, it's another day in the neighborhood.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Well, yeah, we used to always say in the Army, train how you're going to fight, and you'll
Yeah.
fight the way you were trained. So you've got that standard, you want to stick with that standard. But yeah, I mean, the tempo, you can't keep that tempo up all the time. That you've got to back off it a little bit and but be mindful of what it is.
You always have to know where you are.
Yeah.
On the slope.
Yep.
Right. Because if you don't, you'll end up down here.
Right.
Right. So that's something that it's important. I mean, I worked in nuke power 22 years, zero defect environment, right? You can't make a mistake in that industry.
Right.
I mean, you can make little mistakes, but you can't ever make the big mistake.
Right.
So you treat all the little mistakes like they're big mistakes. In an effort to not have the big mistake. But that wears on people. I mean, that wears on you.
Right.
Over time, right? It takes a mental and even physical toll on you to do that all the time.
So a difference between like the military and the civilian world, of course, and for a lot of viewers who have small to medium sized businesses, when you have a small business, when you have a medium-sized business, you get to pick what the vision is, right? You get to pick your core values, you get to pick, and if you're smart, right, and you've got a team, you want to go to your team and you want to say, this is what I see as my vision, but what else do we as a group, as a company, what are our values? Because they can change, they can grow, or evolve in different ways. You can always go to your team and ask them, and you can ask them, for maybe a new mission statement and stuff like that. But in the military, um, is there any opportunity for a leader to convey vision to their people, to talk about core values and shared goals?
Yeah, so yes, in the Navy, the Navy has core values, honor, courage, commitment. So, and everybody knows those. But each commanding officer is required to write a command vision statement. And a lot of commanders view it as not important or
Right.
something they have to do, right?
Right.
Like,
That's a shame.
it is a shame, because if you write a good vision statement, right, everybody has the same core values. Honor, courage.
Honor, courage, commitment, because you keep saying
Yeah.
them so fast.
Yeah, sorry, honor, courage, and commitment.
Right. Yeah.
So if you have that baseline, everybody subscribes that those are tenets that we will all live and operate by.
Right.
But the mission of each unit is different. The mission of a training command is different than the mission of a ship, which is different than the mission of a maintenance facility, right?
Right.
So if you don't take the time to write a vision statement, because technically, if everyone should compare all of their actions and objectives of a
Right.
given day, week, month against the vision statement and ask themselves, if I'm doing this, how is it pushing me closer to this vision? And if it's not, why am I doing it?
Right. Yep.
So if you don't take the time to write anything down, then everybody is just going to assume what they're doing is pushing them closer to the end goal.
And this kind of feeds back into the leadership management, right? You're one or the other. If you've got that vision and you can convince your people that they should be asking, is what I'm doing today moving me closer to that vision or further from it? They are able to make the decisions that they need to make to do what needs to be done versus I'm a manager. Now I got to force everybody to get in line with my vision,
Well, yeah, and managers probably don't have vision statements,
right.
right?
Right.
Their job is to do things right.
Right. Yeah, but you get far more done in my experience when you've got a team of people all pulling the sled in that direction versus, okay, guys, everybody line up and I'm gonna mush
Yeah.
you.
100%, right? And you can be a manager and do both of those things.
Right. You
right?
can. Yeah.
But simplistically, I've heard it described like a leader, a manager does things right, a leader does right things.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I've heard, a manager does things right. A leader does things for the right reasons.
Yeah. So if you, and if you're someone with a vision statement, it doesn't make you a leader either.
No.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Because you have to communicate it. Right.
And you have to walk it.
You have to walk it. I have to convince you to believe in it.
Right.
Right.
But part of that is, I think getting buy-in from people. And one way that I found that is good at getting that buy-in is seeking their counsel on maybe not the whole vision, but key players being able to say, well, this is something I think has been a problem here, or this is a new market that we can move into, or get that information from them. Because you start to put all that together and then you put it into your vision statement. Now everybody's kind of invested a little bit.
Yeah, I see that. I agree with that in part, I think.
Okay.
If you're the leader and you have the vision of where you want to go, one other way to create that is maybe say, okay, here's my vision. Here's where I want to go.
Right.
How do you see what you do fitting into that? Where does it fit?
Right.
What kind of things would you like to do to fit in
Right.
with that ultimate vision of where we're going? And then you don't, I mean, you should solicit feedback. I don't want to say that that's not right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's your vision.
Yeah. No,
right?
Yeah.
So you have to, I think the first step in communicating that vision is say, okay, if this is my vision, where do you fit
Right.
into that? How would you support it? Would you support it?
Right.
Right. And if the answer is no, then maybe you're not on my team.
Right. Well,
Right.
yeah. So, I mean, and that's a valuable aspect of seeking that input because, and I was thinking about that, when I was coming down to this interview today, because, I'd had to advise a client that, after we'd gotten everything all kind of set up and one of the senior people was, giving a lot of pushback about it. I'm like, he's probably shouldn't be part of your team anymore. Just because he doesn't understand what you're trying to do. And and the collaborative team has come together, with a solution and he's not even willing to do that, so, hire and fire by your core values normally is what I say, but sometimes it needs to be hire and fire by your vision.
Yeah. I mean,
if it doesn't align with your vision, or why are you paying them?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a business decision, right? Doesn't mean that person's not a great person or
Right.
maybe not, or maybe the top of their field.
Yep.
There's a book called Legacy about the New Zealand All Blacks, which is the winningest rugby or professional sports team in history in any sport on any continent ever.
Okay.
So how do you achieve that level of dominance for generations? Like, because a rugby player's generation is short, right? Like, it's a rough sport.
Yeah, it's a rough sport. Yeah.
So, you don't see people in that league for like 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So how do you achieve that level of dominance, right? And it's not always picking the best player. They're very, very clear in the book. Like, we have passed over far more talented athletes because they don't fit the culture.
Right.
They don't fit what we're trying to do.
Yep.
And in that case, yeah, you might have the best IT guy ever,
Right.
but he only wants to run DOS, right? Or pick at something, right?
Yeah.
Like, he will not move.
I think the IT people that are watching this are laughing at us.
Yeah, they're like DOS.
DOS, what's that?
But you still, if they're not willing to buy into the vision, then you could part amicably, right? But you need to part.
You need to part, exactly.
If you don't think you can get them there in a reasonable period of time, because at worst, they're actively sabotaging you.
Right.
Right. At best, they're an anchor, right? You're dragging them all along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very frustrating.
This concludes part 3 of our 4-part interview. Be sure to like and subscribe our page. And next Monday will be part 4. Take care.